I had long ago learned the color of invisibility. It was not the clear transparency of glass, but the dull, muted beige of a forgotten tapestry, the precise shade of the wall against which I was meant to blend. My stepmother, Lady Anya, was a master artist in the craft of my effacement. Her words were her brushstrokes, each one a careful layer of varnish that sealed me away from the world. Elara, dear, you are a creature of the shadows. It is where you are most comfortable, is it not? Best not to startle anyone with your presence. Tonight, her masterpiece was a grand society ball, and my designated shadow was a particularly oppressive one. I was placed in a small alcove behind a monstrously large fern, its fronds like grasping green fingers. It was a calculated position, offering a fractured view of the glittering ballroom while ensuring I remained almost entirely obscured. My stepsister, Seraphina, was the sun around which our family's ambitions orbited. She was a vision in silk the color of a summer dawn, her laughter a cascade of silver bells. I was in simple gray, the color of dust, of afterthought. My father, a man whose spine had long since dissolved under the acid of his second wife's will, had given me a brief, apologetic glance before being swept into Anya's wake. He loved peace more than he loved his daughter. It was a quiet, constant ache in my chest. From my verdant prison, I watched the swirl of jewels and satin. The air hummed with forced pleasantries and the delicate clinking of crystal. It was a performance, and I was the stagehand hidden in the wings, unseen and unnecessary to the play itself. I did not mind the solitude, I preferred it. Here, I could retreat into the architecture of my own mind, a place of soaring arches and quiet, logical beauty that no one could touch. I could trace the lines of the ballroom's vaulted ceiling, a fine example of late Palladian symmetry, and wonder about the forgotten masons who had crafted it. My passion was for such things, for the bones of buildings, the grammar of stone, the lost languages of history. It was a passion Lady Anya found both baffling and vaguely shameful, another of my peculiarities to be managed and concealed. "Stand straight, Elara, but do not draw attention," she had hissed before abandoning me. "And for heaven's sake, if anyone should happen to stumble upon you, do not startle them with one of your strange observations." I clutched the small, leather-bound book of architectural sketches I had hidden in the folds of my skirt. It was my shield, my secret country. I was so accustomed to this exile that it had become a form of safety. To be unseen was to be unjudged. To be silent was to be uncorrected. The pain of it had dulled over the years, leaving behind a hard, smooth scar of resignation. I expected nothing, and so I could not be disappointed. Then he had arrived. The music did not stop, but a subtle change rippled through the room, a collective intake of breath that was a sound unto itself. The Duke of Blackwood, Alistair, the man they called the Winter Duke. He was a figure of legend and speculation, a titan of wealth and power who had sequestered himself on his vast estate for nearly a decade. The whispers said he was broken by grief, that the fire which had claimed his wife and young son had also consumed his soul, leaving behind a cold, severe shell. His unexpected decision to attend this ball, the first social event in years, had sent the entire city into a frenzy. He stood at the entrance, a stark figure in immaculate black. He was not handsome in the way of the polished young men who flocked around Seraphina. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, carved from granite and shadowed by a past I could not imagine. His eyes, a startlingly pale gray, swept the room with an unnerving stillness, missing nothing, assessing everything. They passed over the hopeful mothers, the blushing debutantes, the preening lords. They passed over Seraphina's radiant smile and Lady Anya's poised, predatory greeting. His expression did not change. It was a mask of perfect, impenetrable indifference. My stepmother, ever audacious, guided Seraphina forward. I saw her lips move, offering my sister up like a flawless pearl on a velvet cushion. The Duke inclined his head a fraction of an inch, a gesture so minimal it was more an absence of rudeness than an act of courtesy. His gaze continued its slow, inexorable journey across the room. I held my breath, a foolish, reflexive instinct. It was impossible, of course. The fern, the shadows, my own practiced stillness, I was perfectly hidden. And then his eyes stopped. They did not glance, they did not flicker. They settled. On my alcove, on the space between the green fronds where a sliver of my gray dress was visible, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. For a heartbeat, I was certain he was looking at the grotesque porcelain urn that shared my hiding place. But his focus was too sharp, too deliberate. He was looking at me. A cold spike of panic, entirely unfamiliar, shot through me. This was not part of the plan. I was supposed to be invisible. He had not just seen me, he had found me. Ignoring my stepmother's expectant posture, ignoring the path that had been cleared for him toward the hosts, the Duke began to walk. He did not hurry. Each step was measured, silent, and laden with an unnerving purpose. He moved through the glittering throng as if parting water, his eyes never leaving my alcove. The whispers began to follow him, a wave of confusion and disbelief. The ballroom, which had been a sea of noise, began to fall quiet. People turned, heads craned. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to shrink, to dissolve into the damask wallpaper behind me. Lady Anya's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She had been publicly bypassed. Seraphina looked utterly bewildered, her perfect smile frozen in place. He stopped directly in front of the fern. He was taller than I had imagined, a formidable presence that seemed to absorb all the light and air around him. He looked down, his pale eyes finally meeting mine through the leaves. The silence in the room was now absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every eye in the London aristocracy was fixed on this bizarre tableau, the most powerful man in the kingdom, standing before a potted plant, addressing the nothingness behind it. "The fan vaults," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the unnatural quiet, a low, resonant baritone. "They are a later addition, not original to the design. You can see the shift in the springers where they meet the clear story." I stared at him, my mind a complete blank. He was not speaking to the urn, he was speaking to me. And he was speaking my language. The language of stone and form, of architectural truth. The question was so specific, so esoteric, it was as if he had reached directly into my mind and plucked out a thought. The panic receded, replaced by a dizzying surge of something else. Recognition. I forgot the 100 pairs of eyes. I forgot Lady Anya's simmering rage. I forgot that I was the girl who was meant to be silent. The intellectual, the observer, the part of me I kept so carefully hidden, rose to the surface, compelled by a force it could not resist. "Yes," I heard myself say, my voice a rusty whisper. I cleared my throat. "They were added after the fire of 1788. The original was a hammer beam roof. The vaults are a neoclassical interpretation of the Gothic style, a fashionable compromise, but they disrupt the vertical integrity of the original fenestration." A flicker of something. Surprise? Approval? Moved in the depths of his gray eyes. It was there and gone in an instant. He gave a single, sharp nod. It was a gesture of validation, a silent acknowledgement of a shared understanding. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me in the wreckage of the ballroom's silence. He moved toward the host, resuming his ducal duties as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. The spell of my invisibility had been shattered. The Winter Duke had walked across a crowded room, ignored the most beautiful girl in London, and spoken to the shadow behind the fern about architecture. And the entire world had seen him do it. The days that followed were a new and special kind of torment. Lady Anya's fury was a palpable presence in our home, a cold front that seeped under doors and frosted the windows. She did not yell. Her cruelty was always more precise than that. She spoke to me with a saccharine sweetness that was sharper than any blade, her words dripping with condescending pity. "Poor Elara. You must have been so mortified. The Duke was clearly amusing himself at your expense. A cruel jest to single out the plainest girl in the room." I knew she was likely right. It was the only logical explanation. He was a bored, powerful man, and I had been a momentary diversion. A strange insect he had noticed under a leaf. The hope that had flickered in the ballroom, a wild, terrifying thing, was something I tried desperately to extinguish. Hope was a danger I could not afford. It was the precursor to the deepest pain. I retreated further into myself, rebuilding the walls he had so effortlessly breached. And yet, I could not forget the look in his eyes. It was not mockery. It was focus. An intensity that had seen past the gray dress and the frightened posture and had addressed the mind within. I replayed the moment endlessly, the low timbre of his voice, the architectural terms that felt like a secret handshake. It was a madness to dwell on it. I knew that. But the memory was a small, warm coal in the cold grate of my existence. A week after the ball, a footman in the severe, dark green livery of the Blackwood estate arrived at our door. He carried a single, heavy cream envelope, sealed with a stark black wax crest. My heart stopped. Lady Anya, assuming it was an invitation for Seraphina, a belated apology for the Duke's strange behavior, took it with a triumphant smile. She broke the seal. Her smile faltered. Her eyes scanned the crisp black script, and the color drained from her face, leaving behind a mottled, ugly shade of disbelief. "What is this?" she breathed, her voice tight with confusion. She looked up, not at Seraphina, but at me, her eyes narrowed with a venomous suspicion. "What have you done?" She thrust the letter at me. My hands trembled as I took it. The summons was written in the same hand as the address, a strong, decisive script. It was not an invitation to a social event. It was a request. His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood, requests the presence of Miss Elara Vance at Blackwood Manor on Thursday next, at 2 o'clock post-meridium. The purpose is to consult with her regarding the codices of Vitruvius in his private library. It was signed not by the Duke, but by his secretary, a formal and yet deeply personal command. Vitruvius, the Roman architect. The foundational texts I had only ever dreamed of seeing original prints of. He had not been mocking me. He had been listening. "This is absurd," Lady Anya snapped, snatching the letter back. "A trick. He is setting you up for some greater humiliation." "Perhaps we should send a polite refusal," my father murmured, venturing a rare opinion. He looked terrified. The Duke was not a man to be trifled with, but the idea of me being singled out was an unwelcome disruption to his quiet life. "No," Lady Anya said, a calculating gleam entering her eyes. "No, we cannot refuse a ducal summons. It would be a grave insult." Her mind was clearly working, twisting this strange event to her advantage. "She will go. But you, Seraphina, will accompany her. As a chaperone. It is only proper. He will see you again, and this bizarre fixation with Elara will be corrected when he is reminded of what true grace and beauty are." And so it was that I found myself in our family's carriage, rolling toward the imposing gates of Blackwood Manor, with Seraphina beside me and a cold knot of dread and fragile, treacherous hope in my stomach. I was walking into the lion's den, but for the first time in my life, I was not entirely certain I wanted to escape. Blackwood Manor was not a house. It was a statement. A vast Gothic edifice of gray stone that seemed to rise from the earth like a natural feature of the landscape. It was severe and beautiful, a fortress of solitude that perfectly mirrored its master. As we were shown into the grand entrance hall, the air grew still and cool, smelling faintly of old stone, beeswax, and something else, the clean, sharp scent of rain on cold earth. A tall, severe woman with hair the color of iron met us, Mrs. Albright, the housekeeper. Her expression was as unreadable as the Duke's. "Miss Vance," she said, her eyes on me. Her gaze flickered to Seraphina with a hint of confusion. "His Grace is expecting you. This way." She did not acknowledge my sister further. She led us, through corridors that felt more like museum galleries, their walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Seraphina looked uncomfortable, out of her element in the profound silence of the house. I, however, felt a strange sense of homecoming. This was a place built on history, on substance. It did not glitter, it endured. The library was breathtaking. It was a cathedral of knowledge, 2 stories high, with walls of books that soared toward a coffered ceiling. A rolling ladder leaned against one shelf, promising access to forgotten worlds. Sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden spirits. and in the center of it all, standing before a massive oak table covered in unfurled scrolls, was the Duke. He looked up as we entered. His gaze went to me, then to Seraphina, and a faint line appeared between his brows. "Miss Vance, thank you for coming." He gestured to the table. He did not welcome Seraphina. He did not even look at her again. The dismissal was so complete it was almost invisible, yet it hung in the air, a profound and undeniable statement. Mrs. Albright stepped forward. "Miss," she said, her voice directed at Seraphina, "perhaps you would be more comfortable in the morning room. I can have tea brought for you." It was a polite command. Seraphina, flustered and for once unsure of her social footing, could only nod and allow herself to be led away. Lady Anya's plan had failed before it had even begun, and then we were alone. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. I felt an overwhelming urge to apologize for my existence, for the trouble I was causing, the old ingrained habit of making myself small. He broke the silence. "I do not engage in cruel jests, Miss Vance." The statement was so direct, so perfectly attuned to my deepest fear, that I could only stare at him. "I am not amusing myself at your expense," he continued, his voice low and even. "I am in need of an expert opinion, and it was suggested to me that you might possess the requisite knowledge." "Suggested?" I finally found my voice. "By whom?" "By you," he said simply. He walked over to a glass-fronted cabinet and unlocked it. "5 years ago, at a tedious garden party at Lord Ashworth's estate, you were 17. You were engaged in a debate with your tutor, a Mr. Pembroke, regarding a disputed passage in Cassiodorus. You argued that the term mechanica, as he used it, referred not to crude machinery, but to the elegant mathematical principles of structural engineering, a point a dozen established scholars have missed." My mind reeled back through time. I remembered the argument. I had been passionate, forgetting myself, until I saw Lady Anya's disapproving scowl from across the lawn and had fallen silent, ashamed. I had no idea anyone else had been listening. "You remembered that?" I whispered, stunned. "I remember things of substance," he said, returning with a heavy vellum-bound book. He laid it gently on the table. It was an early printing of Vitruvius, the ink faded but the lines of the drawing still clear and precise. "I have been planning the restoration of the west wing of this house. The original plans were lost in the fire. I am trying to reconstruct them from foundational principles. I require a mind that understands not just how to build, but why. A mind that sees the poetry in a load-bearing wall." He looked at me, and his gaze was like a physical touch. "I believe that mind belongs to you." My carefully constructed defenses crumbled. Pity I could have withstood. Cruelty I was accustomed to. But this profound intellectual respect from a man the world saw as a remote and unfeeling monolith, was disarming. It was terrifying. It was a door opening into a room I never knew existed, a room filled with light. For the next 2 hours, we spoke of nothing but architecture. We leaned over the ancient texts, our fingers tracing the same lines, our minds engaged in a silent, exhilarating dance. He was brilliant, his questions sharp and insightful. He did not condescend. He challenged. He listened. I forgot to be timid. I forgot to be the overlooked stepdaughter. I was simply Elara, a scholar in the presence of a peer. In the heart of that silent, magnificent library, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, I felt, for the first time in my life, truly and completely seen. When it was time for me to leave, he walked me to the entrance hall himself. Mrs. Albright was waiting with my cloak. Seraphina was nowhere to be seen, having already been dispatched back to her carriage. As I prepared to depart, the Duke stopped me. "The evenings grow cool, Miss Vance," he said. He had a heavy wool shawl in his hands, the color of deep heather. "The carriage provided by your family is, I have noted, poorly insulated. Please take this." It was a simple, practical act of kindness, but it was more than that. It was an acknowledgement of the small, daily cruelties I endured, the drafts of neglect that were as much a part of my life as the air I breathed. He saw those too. I took the shawl, my fingers brushing his. A strange current, warm and startling, passed between us. I looked up and saw that his severe expression had softened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Your Grace," I murmured. "Alistair," he said, his voice rougher than before. "My name is Alistair." That name became a talisman. Our consultations became a weekly ritual, the fixed point in the turning world of my life. Lady Anya was apoplectic, but she was trapped. To forbid me from obeying a ducal summons was unthinkable. She contented herself with venomous whispers and cutting remarks, which I found I could now bear with a new quiet fortitude. I had my sanctuary. I had the library. I had Alistair. Our conversations flowed beyond architecture into the realms of philosophy, history, and poetry. We discovered a shared love for the Stoics, for the stark beauty of a logical proof. He had a mind like a finely crafted watch, precise and complex. I learned to anticipate his intellectual leaps, to counter his arguments with my own. He would challenge me, pushing me to defend my positions, and a rare ghost of a smile would touch his lips when I successfully cornered him in a logical fallacy. It was the most intimate courtship I could have imagined, a meeting of minds that felt more profound than any physical caress. During our fourth meeting, the heavens opened in a furious downpour. The sky outside the library windows turned a bruised purple-gray, and rain lashed against the glass. The storm seemed to charge the air inside, making the silence between our words more potent. He had been unusually quiet that afternoon, his gaze distant. He led me from the library down a corridor I had not seen before. It ended at a heavy oak door, scorched and blackened around the edges. He stopped, his hand resting on the scarred wood. "This was the entrance to the West Wing," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, a recitation of fact. "My wife's rooms, my son's nursery." The air grew thick with a grief so immense it felt like a physical presence. This was the source of his solitude, the heart of his winter. I stood beside him, silent, knowing that no words I could offer would be adequate. I simply bore witness to his pain. "They said the fire was an accident. A fallen candle," he continued, his eyes fixed on the door. "But I have always believed it was a failure of design, a flaw in the structure. A house, a home, should protect its inhabitants. It should not become their tomb." He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were not the cold gray of stone, but the turbulent gray of a storm-tossed sea. "That is why it must be rebuilt. Perfectly. It cannot be a monument to what I lost. It must be a testament to what can be made safe, what can be made to last." In that moment, the formidable Duke of Blackwood vanished, and all I saw was Alistair. A man haunted not just by loss, but by a profound sense of failure. He had revealed the deepest, most vulnerable part of himself, the wound he had hidden from the entire world. And he had shown it to me. Impulsively, I reached out and laid my hand on his arm. It was a small gesture, a breach of all propriety. He stiffened for a second, surprised, then relaxed into the touch. He did not pull away. He simply stood there, allowing that small point of contact, and I felt the rigid control he held over himself falter. He covered my hand with his own, his grip surprisingly warm, his thumb stroking the back of my knuckles once before he let go. The touch was brief, but it was a tectonic shift. A border had been crossed. From that day forward, something shifted between us. The intellectual companionship was still there, the bedrock of our connection, but it was now overlaid with a fragile, unspoken tenderness, a lingering glance, the accidental brush of hands over a blueprint that felt less and less accidental. Once, I stumbled on the rolling ladder, and he was there in an instant, his hands firm on my waist, steadying me. He held on for a moment longer than necessary, his face close to mine, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between our eyes. His expression was transformed, the severity erased by a raw, unguarded emotion that made my breath catch in my throat. Lady Anya saw the change in me. I carried myself differently. The constant fear that had hunched my shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. I met her gaze instead of looking at the floor. My very presence, which she had worked so hard to erase, was becoming solid, undeniable, and she could not bear it. Her campaign of sabotage began with insidious subtlety. A misplaced message from the Duke so that I missed a meeting. A chance encounter she arranged for Seraphina with one of his business associates, hoping to forge a connection by proxy. When these failed, her desperation curdled into outright malice. I was in my room, sketching a design for the new fenestration of the West Wing, when she entered without knocking. Her face was alight with a triumphant, cruel smile. "I have wonderful news, Elara," she said, her voice dripping with false benevolence. "I have been so worried about your future. A girl with your particularities. It is a mother's duty to see her daughter settled." A cold dread washed over me. "What have you done?" "I have secured you a most advantageous match," she announced, savoring each word. "Lord Gillespie. He is a man of some years, it is true, but he has a fine estate in the north. He is in need of a quiet, sensible wife to manage his household. He finds your silent nature most appealing. The contracts will be drawn up by the end of the week. Lord Gillespie. A boorish, indebted widower 3 times my age, a man known for his foul temper and wandering hands. He was a creature from a nightmare. It was not a marriage. It was a sentence. A life of exile in the bleak north, away from everything I had just begun to discover. Away from Alistair. "No," I said, the word a raw tear in the fabric of the room. Her smile tightened. "You have no say in the matter. Your father has already agreed. It is for the best. It will put an end to these foolish, embarrassing trips to Blackwood Manor and the ridiculous fantasies you have clearly been entertaining." Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. This was her checkmate. She was removing me from the board entirely, but her attack was two-pronged. The next day, as I sat numbly in my room, a letter arrived for me. It was not from the Duke. It was from my father. A note of spineless apology, informing me that Lady Anya had also written to the Duke, explaining that I was unwell, that I was prone to delusions and had been fabricating the extent of his interest in me to elevate my own status. She had painted me as a pathetic, grasping creature, and she had used my own father's name to sign her lies. She was not just exiling me, she was poisoning the well, ensuring that even if I tried to cry for help, Alistair would believe I was merely a madwoman. The walls of my world, which had just begun to expand, were now crashing in on me with breathtaking speed and cruelty. I felt the old invisibility creeping back, no longer a beige tapestry, but a black shroud. I wept, not silent, resigned tears, but hot, angry tears of a loss I had not even known I was capable of feeling. I wept for the library, for the conversations, for the man who saw me. I wept for the life I had glimpsed just before it was snatched away. The summons came 2 days later. It was not a polite request for consultation. It was a command, a single sheet of paper delivered by a grim-faced rider from the Blackwood estate. "Be at my residence tomorrow at 3. Your father, Lady Anya, and Miss Seraphina Vance are to accompany you." The air in the carriage on the way to the manor was thick with a toxic mix of my stepmother's smug triumph and my father's palpable terror. Lady Anya believed her letter to the Duke had worked. She thought this meeting was for him to politely but firmly sever all ties, to endorse her decision to have me married off and sent away. She was preening, adjusting her gloves, preparing to play the role of the concerned, benevolent matriarch. I was a hollow shell. I had no fight left. She had won. Alistair would see me now only through the lens of her lies, a pathetic, delusional spinster. The humiliation would be absolute. We were not shown to the morning room or the drawing room. Mrs. Albright, her face a mask of granite, led us directly to the library, to our sanctuary. The sight of it, the place of my brief, bright happiness, was like a physical blow. Alistair was not standing by the table. He was seated behind the massive oak desk at the far end of the room, a position of ultimate authority. He looked like a king seated on a throne, judging the fates of his subjects. The light from the window behind him cast his face in shadow, making his expression impossible to read, but the sheer force of his stillness was terrifying. This was not the intellectual peer I had shared secrets with. This was the Winter Duke in all his formidable power. He did not rise as we entered. He watched us approach, his pale eyes missing nothing. He gestured to the 3 chairs placed before his desk. "Please, be seated." Lady Anya sat with a confident rustle of her silks. My father sank into his chair as if his bones had turned to water. Seraphina looked nervous, glancing between the Duke and me with wide, uncertain eyes. I sat stiffly, my gaze fixed on a point on the floor, bracing myself for the final, killing blow. "I have called you here," Alistair began, his voice dangerously calm, "to discuss a matter of some urgency regarding Miss Elara Vance." "Your Grace," Lady Anya interjected, her voice oozing with syrupy concern. "I am so glad you understand. As I explained in my letter, we have been so worried. Her fancies, they have become quite alarming. Her father and I felt a quiet life in the country, a stable marriage, would be the best cure for her. Delicate nerves." Alistair let the silence hang in the air for a moment after she finished. Then he picked up a letter from his desk. It was her letter. "Your letter, Lady Anya," he said, his voice dropping to a glacial calm. "The one you wrote, but which you had your husband sign. The one that speaks of delusions and fabrications." He let his eyes rest on my father, who flinched as if struck. "Did you write this, sir?" Alistair asked, his voice soft but laced with steel. My father stammered, unable to meet his gaze. Well, Anya felt it seemed for the best. So, you did not write it. You merely allowed your name to be attached to a series of malicious falsehoods about your own daughter." It was not a question, it was a verdict. Alistair turned his gaze back to Lady Anya. Her confident smile was beginning to fray at the edges. "And this marriage," the Duke continued, his voice like chipping ice, "to Lord Gillespie, a man whose debts are almost as notable as his reputation for cruelty. You call this a cure? I would call it a punishment, a convenient way to remove an obstacle." "An obstacle?" Lady Anya bristled, her composure cracking. "She is my daughter. I only want what is best for her." "She is not your daughter," Alistair said, the words sharp as shards of glass. "She is your victim, and your obstacle." He picked up a second sheaf of papers from his desk. "You see, after receiving your rather imaginative letter, I had my solicitors conduct a small investigation into your finances, Lady Anya. Specifically, into the matter of the first Mrs. Vance's dowry." The last of the color drained from my stepmother's face. My father looked up, utterly confused. "A considerable sum," the Duke went on, his tone methodical, relentless, "and a portfolio of properties, all of which was left in trust not to your husband, but to his daughter Elara, to be hers upon her marriage or her 25th birthday. You have been systematically liquidating those assets for years to fund your social ambitions and pay for your own daughter's gowns. Elara is not a burden on this family. This family has been living on her inheritance." The truth of it hit the room with the force of a physical explosion. Seraphina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father stared at his wife, a flicker of horrified understanding dawning in his weak eyes. "That's a lie!" Lady Anya shrieked, her mask of gentility finally shattering, revealing the snarling fury beneath. "Slander! You have no proof!" "I have every receipt," Alistair said calmly. "Every transaction. Every letter you wrote to your broker. It is all here. Marrying Elara off to a man like Gillespie, a man you could control, exiling her to the north. It was your final move to secure the theft, to ensure she never discovered the truth." He paused, letting his words sink in, letting her perfidy be fully exposed in the silent, horrified air of the library. And then he looked at me. His eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with a fierce, protective fire. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been beaten down and silenced for a lifetime, finally broke free. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I stood. I turned and looked at the woman who had spent 2 decades trying to erase me. "You told me my mind was a flaw," I said, my voice trembling but clear. It carried in the vast room my own words finally spoken. You told me my passions were an embarrassment. You told me my silence was my only virtue, the only thing that made me tolerable. I took a step toward her. She shrank back in her chair. You tried to make me believe I was worthless, a creature of the shadows, fit only to be hidden behind a fern. You stole my mother's legacy and told me I was a burden. You did not do it for my own good. You did it because my very existence was a threat to you. Because a mind you could not control terrified you. You were not trying to protect me. You were trying to extinguish me. Tears were streaming down my face now, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of rage, of grief, of a lifetime of suppressed pain finding its voice. You are the fraud, I said, my voice rising with every word of truth. You are the empty one. Your entire life is a performance, a glittering shell with nothing inside. You were wrong about everything. You were wrong about me. Lady Anya stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. She was utterly defeated, exposed by the Duke's facts and annihilated by my truth. Seraphina rose and came to my side, her own eyes filled with tears. She's right, she whispered, looking at her mother with dawning horror. All this time, I never saw. Elara, I am so sorry. My father finally looked at me, his face crumpled with a shame so profound it was pitiable. Elara, he choked out. My child, forgive me. I could not answer him. I could only look at Alistair, the man who had given me back my voice. He had not rescued me with a sword, but with something far more powerful, the truth. He had armed me with it, and he had trusted me to wield it myself. He stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of the ruined woman in the chair. You will restore every penny of Elara's inheritance, he said to Lady Anya, his voice leaving no room for argument. My solicitors will oversee it. You will leave this house, and you will never, ever approach Elara or any member of her family again. If you do, these papers, he tapped the stack on his desk, will be in the hands of the Crown Prosecutor by noon. Do you understand me? She could only nod, a broken, sobbing wreck. Her reign was over. After they were gone, Lady Anya escorted out by a stony-faced Mrs. Albright, my father and a newly resolute Seraphina, following in a daze of shame and revelation, the library fell into a profound silence. It was not the oppressive silence of the ballroom, but a quiet filled with the echoes of catharsis. I stood by the window, watching the last of the afternoon light paint the grounds in shades of gold and amber, my body trembling with the aftershocks of the confrontation. Alistair came to stand beside me. He did not speak for a long time. He simply shared the quiet, his presence a solid, comforting anchor in the storm of my emotions. I did not do this to save you, Elara, he said at last, his voice soft. I turned to look at him. What do you mean? You did. You saved me from a life that would have been a prison. No, he insisted, his gaze intense. A man does not save a fortress by admiring its strength. I simply dismantled the siege engines that were arrayed against it. The fortress was never in danger of falling. Its foundations were too strong. He reached out and gently brushed a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. I did it because I could not bear to see such a rare and brilliant mind, such a resilient spirit be smothered. I did it because the thought of you being sent away, of this room falling silent again, was more than I could endure. He took my hands in his grip warm and sure. For 10 years, this house has been a tomb, filled with the ghosts of my past. I walked through it, but I did not live in it. And then you came. You filled these rooms with light and logic and life. You spoke the language of my own soul back to me. You are not a creature of the shadows, Elara. You are the architect of the light. My heart felt as if it would burst. All my life I had yearned for one person to see past the plain exterior and value the mind within. And here was the one man I had come to admire above all others, telling me my mind was the very thing he cherished most. I am asking you not to be a guest in this house anymore, he said, his voice growing thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. I am asking you to be its mistress, to be my partner, my duchess, my equal in all things. He gave a small, wry, and utterly beautiful smile. To argue with me about Vitruvius for the next 50 years. I don't want to rescue you, Elara. I want you to stand beside me, always. I see you. Will you let me see you for the rest of our lives? Tears of a different kind. Tears of profound, overwhelming joy welled in my eyes. Yes, I whispered. Oh, yes, Alistair. He lowered his head and kissed me. It was not a kiss of fiery, sudden passion. It was a kiss of deep and certain recognition, a confirmation of everything that had passed between us. It tasted of old books, of rain-soaked earth, and of homecoming. It was the end of a very long winter, and the first, breathtaking dawn of spring. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of the newly completed west wing of Blackwood Manor. The stone was fresh and pale, warmed by the afternoon sun. Below, the gardens were in full, riotous bloom, a testament to the life that had returned to this place. Alistair came to stand behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. I leaned back against him, my hand covering his. A simple, elegant gold band, the twin of the one he wore, felt solid and real on my finger. The Duchess of Blackwood appears to be contemplating something of great significance, he murmured into my hair. I smiled, turning my head to kiss his cheek. I was just thinking about the Palladian symmetry of that balustrade and how it creates a perfect dialogue with the lines of the distant hills. He laughed, a low, warm sound that I had come to love more than any other. Of course you were. And you are right, of course. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun begin its slow descent. The wing we had designed together was no longer a place of ghosts. It was filled with light, with books, with our shared life. The library was still our sanctuary, but now the whole house felt like home. My father and Seraphina visited often, our relationship slowly healing, rebuilt on a foundation of honesty. Seraphina, freed from her mother's ambitions, had discovered her own quiet passion for botany and was blissfully happy. I thought of the girl in the gray dress, hiding behind a fern, believing herself to be invisible. She seemed like a character from a distant story, a person I once knew. She was not gone. She was the foundation upon which I had been built, her resilience the stone, her intellect the design. But Alistair had been the master builder who had seen the blueprint of her soul and had known its worth. He had not given me a voice. He had simply created the space where I was finally safe enough to use my own. He had not made me visible. He had merely been the first to truly look. And in his eyes, I had finally seen myself.